And welcome back to Flexible Games, where we are continuing the GUI tutorial series for vintage story modding. This is an important episode. I know people want me to jump into it right away, and a little bit of background. I worked to about 2 weeks, about a week and a half to 2 weeks, getting this GUI looking like this. And this is the episode where we dive into how to actually generate the GUI. I'm not going to get into the next episode is going to be how to change things in real time. That's going to be next episode. This episode is just on how to construct, organize, and get your GUI how you want it, right? Let's jump into it right away. Okay. So, one of the first things that you're going to want to do, open the image editor of your choice. Any image editor, GIMP, Photoshop, Paint, whatever you want to do, as long as you are comfortable in that editor. And you want to think to yourself, what do I want in my GUI? What are the elements that I want to do? What are the things that I need? How do I lay this GUI out? So right now, all of my values for this GUI are hard-coded. All of them. I wanted to make sure that people saw exactly how things are referenced, how things are sized, and how everything relates to one another. Okay? So my Photoshop example of that is here, right? So I have a mock-up. I have basically like just something. But this is my bounds. And all of these, let's get not that one. Not that one. There we go. This is my GUI that I laid out ahead of time, right? The size of this square, this is my input. Right? When you do a slot grid, this is my input slot. I just copied, this is why this is on here. I just copied this, right? It's 48 by 48 pixels. If anybody wants a future reference, when you add a 1x1 slot grid, it is 48 by 48 pixels. That's what gets added. That's an important thing to know, but that's what gets added, right? So I just wanted to know what the size was, because there's really nothing in the code that tells you how big this thing is. You just call slot grid. So this is what I laid out, right? If you want to look at what these are, this thing here, right? This thing here is a simple square, right? And I just have, this is why, I mean, like I said before, I'm very comfortable with Photoshop. And to get that inset look is just a simple bevel. That's an inner bevel. The size is 2, and it's an inner bevel. Right? That's how I got that effect and how I got that effect. Because I said, this is going to be my progress bar location, and this one here is going to be my text, and this is my input grid, right? So I'm looking at this, and I'm like, all right, if you want, what you can do is you can get your elements, and you can lay out all your elements, and then you can organize them, and then once you've got them organized and in a way you want, you draw the big square over around everything. Give yourself some padding, give yourself some distance, and once it's all done, you're like, okay, that gives me an idea of how big the GUI is. Now, I want to preface this by saying the size of this outside square is not the same as the GUI. But if you look at this and you're like, all right, here is, let's zoom out. Let's see. Where is my there it is. I don't know what my zoom is. I wish it told me where's my zoom percentage. There it is. So 100% zoom. Let's just do control 0. That's the 100% zoom. And here's my actual GUI. It's really, really big, but the GUI is actually tiny. There's the actual size of it. So you can see the difference. Let's shrink this up. You can sort of see this outside right here. This below the title bar is that exact size. It may not look like it, but it's the exact size of this area inside of here. I have it zoomed way in because, you know, it's just easier to see. But trust me that this size is this below here. You can see this thing down here, right? This area down here. This down here is the size of this. So once you have this, what I recommend doing is getting some guides in there, depending on how big you made it. You know, if you crop it down, you know, whatever you want to choose. If you're in Photoshop and you're like, how big is this thing? How big are all these elements? What are my offsets? You can go up here in the corner and drag this down and go right down to here, and it resets the origin of the image. You can see 0, 0 is now in this corner. If anybody didn't know that, well, Photoshop is just awesome. And as you can see, I stuck with a offset of 10 pixels on this side and 10 pixels on this side. And then on this corner, it's, you know, some arbitrary amount. I think this looks like 44, probably 11 pixels here. Yeah, I could have probably done a better job. But I think I actually fixed that in the code. And then over here, again, you get a little offset. You can see that, but you get a general idea, and then you can look at your bottom corner, and you can get your size, right? So 250 by 124, right? 250 by 124 is the size of that window. Now, what you want to do, if you want a title bar over the top, right? That's 30 pixels. You have to remember that. 30 pixels. I did 31 just because I'm a masochist. So 31. Because when I went in here and I looked, I literally went in here and I opened this up and I was like, how tall is this? And Photoshop has a ruler somewhere in here. Where is it? There it is, ruler. I just went like this, and this told me 31 pixels. Now it's probably one extra, maybe, possibly. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3. Yeah, maybe not. 31 pixels. Anyway, what I think is it's 30, and I might have been off by a little bit. But anyway, if you want a title bar, take your window that you had set, the dimensions of the window that you figured this out, right? And you add 30 pixels to the top, or 30 pixels to the height. Now, here's the important bit. In your code, we are going to run down this step by step, and we are going to create an exact copy of our layout only in code. Okay? So, I want to bring up Photoshop. I'm going to have this. Let's hide those. Let's hide that. There's no way to set this off to the side. So we're going to do that. And then shrink this up even more if we can. I've never actually done this, but all right. So that'll just give you an idea of what we're looking at. Okay. Once you have the size set of these, and the size of the progress bar is I know my SVG file. What I did last episode, the SVG file, or the original PNG, was 30 pixels by 100 pixels. So I know the thing is drawn based on that. All of the draw code that we went over last episode is based on 30 pixels by 100 pixels. So this inset here is depth of 2, or size of 2. And so the actual outline is 4 pixels wider and 4 pixels taller. So the power inset, right? Power inset is fixed size. Your 10 offset, that's 10 going in. Okay. Oh my God. So the 10 pixels in, okay, this 41, right, is the 10 pixels down plus the 31 pixels I discovered for the title bar, which is why that exists. Now you could easily set int title bar height equals 30, right? And in my case, it's 31. And I could do 10 plus title bar height. Okay? If that makes you feel better. Oh my God. Power inset. I knew I cleared some code out. It was that damn thing. I got to be careful. The shortcut keys for Photoshop will really mess this up. So again, the bounds for the power bar itself, I want to really be specific on where this thing is drawn. This kind of gets away from how they do it in the vanilla code, and I don't like it. I don't like how they do it in the vanilla code, and I will get to that at the end of the episode. So if you want my rant on how they do it in the end of the code or in the vanilla code, we wait for that. Anyway, so here again, the bounds, remember the inset is going to be depth of 2, and so I need that padding of 2 pixels on each side. So this is going to go in 12. Remember, it always is drawn from the top. The top left corner is where everything is drawn from. That's the absolute start of the window. So if we look, this up here, right here, that is where everything is drawn from. All of the offsets are drawn from that. And so all of these components come from that spot. That is the master spot, right? And in this instance, it's the title bar is 31 pixels above that. So, again, I can go 12 and 12 plus title bar height. So that gives you an idea, like, why those numbers are different. 10 plus title bar height, 12 plus title bar height. You're offsetting at 10 and 10, and then 12 and 12. And so that offsets it in from that corner again. And then you're giving it the height, or the width first, and then the height. So again, they're drawn going to the right and down. So the offset's down in, and then width is 30, height is down 100, which gives you the exact size of that grid or that SVG code that draws. It's the exact height that fits perfectly inside of that element bounds. The bounds are just, we'll get to the importance of the bounds in a second. The fuel grid, right? That's the input spot. The fuel grid is, instead of being a fixed, it is a slot grid. And here again is 54 and 69. And 69 is actually 38, I believe. If we look at Photoshop again, right? We want this corner right here. This corner right there is what I'm saying. 38 is down, 55 is across, right? Well, 54. So 54, I remember I bumped this back one for reasons beyond, yeah. So 54, and then 69 here, you'd look at this and go, this is only 38. Well, remember, it's 38 plus title bar height. Right? The title bar is a set height. It's always going to be that height. It's just confusing as to how everything is offset. Anyway, so in the slot grid, you give it columns and rows. Now, the sizing may change if you have multiple in there. So just be aware that, you know, it might not exactly be multiples of 48. It might be slightly different than that. And, you know, you'd leave it up to you. You know, if you've got a little 2x2 grid for whatever reason on an input, then that might be a little bit differently sized. It's an easy thing to just take a screenshot and measure that and be like, all right, good to go. All right, so the next spot, the next item is this area down here, right? If we look at Photoshop again, this is the next spot, and we want to take this, and again we have element bounds fixed X, that's over, right? And then down is 41. Well, that's not 41. That's 10 plus title bar height. And then this is 12 plus title bar height. Again, I'm adding the inset is just that's what draws that border. That's all that does, right? The border and the background color, which is where you get the black on here and the not black over here. This black is coming from the inset that's drawn, right? So that takes care of all of the components in this GUI. We have the inset, we have the progress bar, we have the slot grid, we have this inset, and we have the area inside for the text bounds, right? The text bounds is just what is going to contain, what are my boundaries to contain whatever I want to put in there, right? So it could be your custom SVG, could be text, could be a picture, could be, you know, something that you load in, could be an animation, could be a lot of different things, but the bounds is how everything is encapsulated, right? So the dialogue bounds is the whole enchilada, the whole thing, right? And right now I'm saying it's a fixed size. It is a fixed size. It is 250 across and 155 tall, right? If we look at our Photoshop image, right, and we look at this, my 0, 0 is already set, right? And if we look down here, you can see it is 250 across and 124 down. Well, why is this 155? Because this is 124 plus title bar height. Because we have to have that offset. Otherwise, all of our components are going to overlap the title bar, right? So the dialogue bounds is the whole thing. The dialogue here, the fixed padding that we're going to, well, yeah, this is it's just some of the things in the GUI system are just confusing. The dialogue here is setting padding, right? I have 0 padding. Why I did that compared to every other GUI in the game, I have 0 padding because I wanted all of these values, right? X and Y, I wanted them to be absolutely accurate. I did not want them moving because of some invisible, abstract padding that I have no control over. I wanted absolute control over that value. Just to get it to work. for this example, this tutorial example. All right, so now we have all of the elements in here. And now it's just a matter of getting them all combined all up in a system that is working. So once you have all of those things set and you have all of the grids or all of the element bounds of all of the little components that you want, now is the time we all start putting everything together. So the sizing, the dialogue here, the fit to children, what you can do if you don't want to worry about the end size of the dialogue, if you don't care how big the dialogue gets, you can place stuff in the dialogue and you can have it stretch or shrink depending on how big the dialogue or how big those elements are, right? So the fit to children is saying when I add children, I'm literally adding all of these children into this dialogue. This bounds, right? The element bounds of this dialogue with zero. I don't want any padding. I'm saying all of these elements here are all children inside of this. Now, there are probably ways to have children inside of children, some hierarchy of things if you want to work on very complex GUIs, but I wanted to keep it simple. And this code here is just directly copied. We're adding a new window, right? So this window is auto-sized main dialogue with alignment. This is actually, when you open the GUI, right? This is what plops it on the screen wherever. So when you open most GUIs, most inventories, they all appear actually on this side of the screen. I wanted to show that. So remember, the GUIs like pop up on this side of the screen for you guys. This is what controls that. And then immersive mouse mode, I don't know if anybody ever uses that, but it changes the offsets depending on that kind of stuff. Okay. Now we get into the actual code that builds the GUI. First I get the block position of the entity that we're on. So this is just saying this entity, this specific GUI, this is the block position that we're at, because each GUI has to be unique to the individual block position, right? Which is what I do down here. I build right here the composition dialog name. Now, this is not the name that appears in the title bar. This is the internal name of this dialog box, right? Has to be unique in order for the game to keep track of it all, because you can have multiple windows open at once, remember? You can go to this storage and this storage and this storage and open all these windows. Well, all of those windows are open at once. They all have to have unique identifiers. And this is how it does it. It's just based on block position. And the composition is the element bounds is the window, which is the whole, it's just kind of the wrapper for the whole thing. And then we add inside the window, we're adding the shaded dialog background of the dialog object here, right? So it's just a component. This is the dialog. It's going to be the shaded inside window. We're going to add a title bar. So this is what adds that title bar on the top. Remember, this is the whole window, adds that title bar to the top and passes in what to do when the X is hit on title bar close, which is just a very simple try close. It's a built-in thing to the GUI class try close. It's just, it cleans up the memory and it cleans up all of the things, all of the resources that the GUI uses. Okay. We'll get into what this code does in a second. So once we have the title bar, then we want to begin the child elements. Now, yeah, we added the children up here. Why you have to add them twice, I don't know. You just do. So just, copy the code and do it again. So begin child elements, the dot that we have at the end, because each one of these returns the GUI composer. So you can just keep adding stuff to the same composer over and over and over and over again, which is nice. So each one of these is like this single composer is in front of every one of these. Single composer equals, whatever single composer dot add shade dialog box. Single composer dot add title bar. You're just adding more and more and more stuff to that element. So the begin child elements, this is the first inset, the power inset, and I wanted to build this in the order that they're drawn, or in the order that you see them from left to right. And so this inset is the power inset. Depth of 2, right? Depth of 2, brightness 0.85. Okay, that's that brightness of the thing behind there. That's the brightness. That is why this is the same shade as this. This back in here is the same shade as that, is that brightness value. And then I add dynamic custom draw. I give it the bounds. Remember, power inset, and then the power bounds. And the bounds is offset a little bit even more. Okay. And then we'll get into this next episode. Draw delegate with bounds. I'll get into that next episode. Then I draw the slot grid, and I give it the fuel grid bound. This is the bounds of the fuel grid and all of the values in here. Send inventory packet is what happens if you add stuff or alter that element bounds, that grid. What gets called when that changes, right? Send inventory packet is what's called, and that just calls a generic block entity packet. It's built in. Again, it's a built-in system. It's glorious. You don't have to worry about it. You do have to do this kind of thing, object packet, and just send off the packet, right? Because typically when you change it, because the GUI is only open on the client, right? Only the client has that GUI open. And when you change that slot is only exists on the client. So you have to immediately send a packet to the server and say, hey, this changed, right? The server picks that up, updates its own inventory, and immediately the machine picks that up and starts burning it if it has space. So this is what informs the server that something changed. And all of the other items in there, columns, again, we have one column. The int selective slots is just a one item int. And then you get the bounds and the key. So there's the bounds and the key. You want to name these. You want to name these things. So anyway, so then we have, that's the grid. Then we have another inset, which is this one over here, right? Add dynamic text. Okay, add dynamic text is the text that's inside of there, and we pass it the actual bounds. Remember, the text bounds in here is, again, a little offset, but the inset, if you look at this inset, is a slightly different call. The brightness setting is 0. 0 brightness equals black background. So if you set the brightness to 1, it's a white background. So you can only set the brightness. I don't know of a way to set the color. I don't think you could set the color. So you can only set the brightness. But yeah, 0 means a black background, which I like it because you can, it's different from all the other GUIs in the game. I like it. And then the dynamic text, I mean, its default is saying updating, and sometimes when you right click the machine, you can see that for just a microsecond, just like a tiny fraction of a second. It will say updating, and then boom, it'll populate with all the text. So the output text here is the font that we're using to draw the bounds of the text, and then the name of that element, right? The composition, the name of that element. This is the bounds, which we set up here, and this is the actual font. It's not the text, it's the font, and that is what this code does. this code creates basically a font instance that's yellow. I declare a Cairo font. I say white detail text with weight, and that sets the weight. I think normal and bold is basically the only options that you have. And then I declare an array of doubles, and I set them 1, 1, 0, which is red, green, blue. Red and green in RGB space equals yellow. So I set those to 1. So if you want to set a color of text, this is how you do it right here. And then I set the output text with color, and I set that to RGB. I wanted to declare a color object. There is a color object, but for some reason, the with color has there are no overrides that I could actually pass it a color object. I don't know. It's an oversight in my book, but it would have been nice. It would have been nice to be able to set that. So I declare this up here, this code declares a new double 3, and I just immediately set all the values inside of it. That's what these brackets do. And then I say with color, and then that's the output text, which is why this color is yellow. That's why this is yellow. All right. And then I set the last redraw to elapsed milliseconds minus 501, and we'll get into why I set that. This last redraw milliseconds is a internal value. It's a debouncer, and we'll get into that next episode. This episode is plenty long. I hope everybody learned how to do this. This is literally all you have to do to build an inventory is just specify all of your bounds, specify your dialogue bounds, specify some base dialogue settings, padding, children, and then just build them all. Put them all in place and get them all oriented right. There are some example codes that are brutally complicated, right? So this is the code for Vi's machines. Here's all of his element bounds. You can see how many he's got in here. All of these element bounds. Now, I don't know if his code actually names these right, but looking at a decompiled, the source code for this mod is not available, which is unfortunate. But I'm assuming he actually named these. He actually named these right, because then here's the block of code. Here's the create compo. Remember, if I look at my code, here's the create compo. It's create composition. You're just basically painting on a canvas is the best analogy. And then from there, all of this code all the way to right here, end child elements. This entire block of code from up here all the way down, and I sort of organized this to be a little bit more readable, but it's still a lot. I mean, it's still a lot of code. I don't know how he kept track of it all, honestly. He even like adds text with element bounds declared inside of this rather than declaring them all here and organizing them for sanity's sake. It's just a nightmare, just an absolute nightmare. So, I wanted an example for my test machine or my test generator to be very, very simple. And I hope I accomplished that for you guys. I hope by looking at this, you can see it is really, really straightforward. Once you know how the coordinate system works, everything is based on the top left corner. Everything is offset from that. All of your bounds are offset from that. Unless you are specifying a bounds that's a child of another bound. I'm guessing that's the exception. But I don't think I've ever seen an example of that in the game. I don't think you have bounds that are, maybe in super complex UIs there's that, but I would be surprised if anything in the game. Maybe the the settings menu or the debug menu or something like that would have really much more complex UIs. But this is very, very simple. You specify the size of your dialogue, specify the padding, and if you specify padding, just know that all of your absolute values, all of your offsets are going to be off. They're all going to be off because padding just ruins everything. So before you add padding, before you add any padding, I would suggest have no padding until you get your dialogue working the way you want. Then you can come in and add scale factors and padding. And for scaling, for GUI scaling, for like visually impaired, if you want to scale things, you scale things in here. There's a GUI element scaler feature. Let's get an example here. This is the fire pit GUI, and it's all on one line because technically all of this is all one line. It's just one long line, but programming wise you can do this and it makes it a lot easier to read. If you looked at the source code of the game itself, he actually has this broken down like I do with returns on each one of these dots. But yeah, all of this stuff in here can be offset and scaled based on scale factors, right? So in here we have scaling. Somewhere in here there's scaling factors. I know that they're in here. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of these are hard-coded. Interesting that he doesn't have any scaling factors in here at all. Yeah, they're all hard-coded. I do know that they exist in the update here, though. Yeah, here they are. GUI element.scaled, right? So the GUI element.scaled, depending on if you're in settings and you change that scale factor, that's what this thing holds, and it will scale any value that you put into it, right? It will put any value in. So it will scale depending on what you put in there, by a certain factor. So everything can be scaled by that. For reasons unknown, I do not know why they do not have any scaling in here on their element bounds. Anyway, but that's what scaling is. You can play around with it if you want, but I would highly recommend when you first build your GUI to have everything hard coded so you know exactly what things are being drawn in what places. Okay. And when I said before at the beginning of this episode that I was going to do a rant, here's my rant. All right. So the fire pit dialogue, okay, has a set of flames that burn down depending on the timing of fuel. So when you put a new fuel in there, the flames start at the top and they slowly burn down. I might even have an example of this. There's an example of this right here. Okay, so there's the flames right there. They also have this arrow that actually is another custom draw, but we're going to focus on the flames right now. As you can see, I'm using the mode that allows you to outline the bounding box of all of the elements. So all of these bounding boxes, those are all the element bounds that are declared in this GUI. So you can see there's a big element bounds out here. There's smaller element bounds that this is holding the text. This is holding the text. These element bounds are holding the actual grids, right? So he's got those. But if you notice, the flame is not in its own element bounds. This is important because if I wanted to use the flames, and I was originally going to try to do this in my I was going to have the input box here at the top and then have flames below it to indicate it, right? I wanted to have the flames down here. However, this dialog box, these flames are drawn directly on this bounds, this large bounds right here. And so if we look at dnspy and we say, well, I want to look at the code that draws that flame right here. I pointed to this before. If we look at these values, you can tell that these values are much larger than a tiny little flame sprite. They're much, much bigger. So it's not drawing the flame sprite in its own tiny little bounds. It's drawing the flame sprite on this enormous size area here. And so if I were to call this, right, it would draw these way over to the side, completely off the bounds, because the bounds are tiny. If I were to integrate the bounds in here, if I were to add another bounds right down here, the same size, just a little bounds, like 48 by 48 pixels, and I wanted to draw this, and I called the base game version of that, it would draw it. Remember, we're based off of this corner here, right? This is the bounds that these flames are drawn on from here. I think it's either here or over here. I think it's here. This bounds right in here, because this is the padding, right? This is the padding that you see around. I think it's this corner, because it's sort of lined up here, but it's drawing these way over here. So imagine if this was just tiny, like this big, right? If this was just this size, it would be still drawing it way down here. It wouldn't even draw. It would just be blank. There would be nothing drawn. So I messaged Tyrone, and I know this would be a massive undertaking, but I messaged Tyrone and I was like, why isn't this its own little element, right? Why isn't this its own element to the exact size of its element, and then the GUI has an element of that size? That way I could have an element of the exact same size in my GUI, call this code, and it would draw perfectly inside of that shape. That would be an ideal output. That would be an ideal situation, but for some reason, right now, the code just doesn't work like that. The same goes, by the way, for the arrow. This too draws forcefully right there. So the kern, I haven't taken a screenshot of that UI, but I think the kern also calls the draw arrow right. If I do an analyze on this, block entity kern draw arrow right, it's doing the exact same thing. So it's offsetting that arrow the exact same amount on both GUIs. And so if any elements are misplaced or changed around, that thing is always drawn in the same coordinates based on the bounding box that it's in. There's no way to separate that arrow in a smaller bounding box the exact size of that arrow. There's no way to do it. And so if you wanted to do that, you would literally need to try to figure out what coordinates, or at least draw your own arrow. You know, you could create your own SVG, you could convert it into Caro, and you could create your own if you wanted that. But yeah, crazy way that they did that, and you know, it really upset me that it was just like all they would have needed to do was create an exact size of what they're drawing, create an element bounds for that, and draw it inside the element bounds, and based all of that code, all of that draw code, based on a much, much smaller element bounds of the exact size that you want. And then you could use it anywhere you want, as long as that element bounds was placed in the same size. It would be ideal. For whatever reason, they didn't do that. I don't know why. Maybe by mind bringing it up, they'll change it up and make it a little bit better, because all of those icons that you see in the icon util, right? All of these icons, there's a ton of them in here. There is a ton of them, right? At this point, I don't know how they're offset. You know, these things here are different. Draw arrow right. Yeah. You notice where is it? Icon util, draw arrow right. So you can see that these have different draw arrow right, context double bool, right? They're different from all these other ones. Right? They're different. And I'm sure draw flames is the same. Yeah. Context double bool. So for some reason, it's not the same. This is the code that gets spit out from the utility. And for some reason, the two, you know, the two that would be most used in other mods do not do that. Because I'm sure these are more or less coded for the width and height of whatever they're drawing at. So this is better. This is the better version of that drawing code, because it's all based off of a scale factor, right? So you can pass in the width and height of what I want, and it will scale the drawing, you know, automatically. All of these draws, all these line twos and stuff would all be scaled based on that matrix. Anyway, that's my rant. Hopefully Tyrone sees the light and resets those, because it's like 2 GUIs and 2, you know, SVGs, and my chair just is just squeaking like crazy today. But anyway, I hope everybody learned. I'm sorry about that rant, but you know, if you find yourself trying to use the arrow or the flame and it's not drawing on your GUI, that is why. That is why. It's a hard-coded offsets depending on where it's drawn. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope everybody learned at least something. You know, watch it twice. Maybe you learn 2 things. I don't know. But thank you guys all for watching. Please hit that like button if you learned something. Comment down below if you've got a question or something to say. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. This is going to be a long process making this mod. I hope you stick around for it. And yeah, consider being a patron and, you know, get access to early builds of the mod before it's released to the public. So everybody, I thank you all for coming by, and I will see you next time.